The blood-red sun dipped low on the horizon as Willa Montgomery stood alone at the altar, the mocking whispers of townsfolk cutting through the silence of the empty church. Her white gown, sewn with such care over countless nights, now felt like a shroud as minutes stretched into hours, and the devastating truth became undeniable. Ethan Foster wasn't coming. Wyoming Territory, 1878. Sweetwater Springs had never seen such a spectacle. The daughter of the town's only doctor, abandoned on her wedding day by the banker's son. Willa's trembling fingers clutched her wilting bouquet of wildflowers as her father finally approached, his weathered face etched with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Willa, darling, it's time to leave, doctor," Montgomery whispered, offering his arm. "Just a few more minutes," she pleaded, her voice barely audible. The desperation in her eyes spoke volumes as she stared at the church doors, willing them to burst open with an explanation that would somehow make this nightmare disappear. But they remained closed, and eventually, Willa allowed herself to be led away, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. She would not give the town the satisfaction of seeing her completely broken, though inside, her heart lay shattered. 3 weeks later, Willa still moved through life like a ghost. She resumed her duties assisting her father at his practice, but her once vibrant spirit had dimmed. The townsfolk treated her with a nauseating mix of pity and morbid curiosity. News had spread that Ethan Foster had fled with a substantial amount from his father's bank money that had been meant to establish their life together. "Willa, could you prepare Mrs. Holloway's tonic?" her father asked one sweltering afternoon as they worked in his office. She nodded silently, moving to the cabinet of medicines. Her fingers worked methodically, measuring ingredients with the precision her father had taught her. Medicine made sense. It followed rules, unlike love. The bell above the door jangled, and Willa didn't look up, assuming it was just another patient seeking her father's expertise. "Doc around?" a deep, unfamiliar voice asked. Willa glanced up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon sun. As her eyes adjusted, the stranger came into focus, a man with broad shoulders, sun-darkened skin, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to catch the light in a way that made them almost luminous. His clothes were trail-worn, a faded blue shirt, dusty trousers, and boots that had clearly seen many miles. A cowboy's hat hung from his fingers. "My father is with a patient," she replied, her voice professional but distant. "He should be finished shortly if you'd care to wait." The stranger nodded, settling into one of the wooden chairs with a slight wince. It was then Willa noticed the dark stain on his sleeve. "You're injured," she stated, setting down the tonic. "It's nothing," he replied, though the tightness around his eyes suggested otherwise. "Just a disagreement with some thorns while rounding up strays." Willa approached, her professional instincts overriding her personal melancholy. "Let me see." He hesitated before extending his arm. Willa carefully rolled up his sleeve to reveal a nasty gash running from his wrist halfway to his elbow. "This needs cleaning and stitches," she said matter-of-factly. "Unless you'd prefer infection and possibly losing the arm," a smile tugged at his lips. "When you put it that way, seems I don't have much choice." Willa gathered her supplies, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts. "I'm qualified to tend to this. My father trained me himself." "I trust you," he said simply, those blue eyes watching her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound with practiced movements. The cowboy barely flinched, even when she began stitching, though she knew it must hurt something fierce. "You're good at this," he observed after a while. "Thank you." "Name's Isaac Blackwood," he offered. "Just signed on with the Triple R Ranch outside town." "Willa Montgomery," she replied, finishing the last stitch. A flicker of recognition crossed his face at her name, and Willa stiffened, waiting for the pitying look she'd grown to despise. But it never came. "Well, Miss Montgomery, I appear to be in your debt," Isaac said instead, examining her handiwork with appreciation. "No debt. It's what we do here," she answered, bandaging his arm. The door to her father's examination room opened, and Dr. Montgomery emerged with Mrs. Peterson, who was clutching a bottle of medicine and looking much relieved. "Now remember, twice daily with meals," her father was saying before noticing the newcomer. "Ah, I see we have another patient." "Already taken care of, father," Willa said, gathering the bloody cloths. "Doctor." Montgomery examined Isaac's bandaged arm with approval. "My daughter has skilled hands. You're fortunate she was here, Mr. Blackwood. Isaac Blackwood." After Isaac paid for the treatment, insisting despite Willa's protests, he paused at the door, turning back to her with an unexpected intensity. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice lowered so only she could hear. "I'm new in town, but I've heard talk." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Some men are fools who don't recognize true value when it's right before them." Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks, unsure how to respond to this stranger's directness. "Good day, Mr. Blackwood," she finally managed, turning away to hide the unexpected emotion his words had stirred. As the door closed behind him, Willa couldn't help but glance out the window, watching his tall figure move down the dusty street. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than numbness, a small spark of something. Indignation, perhaps. Or maybe just surprise that someone had spoken to her as a person, not as the woman left at the altar. The days that followed brought an unusual change to Willa's routine. Isaac Blackwood appeared at the clinic with surprising regularity, first to have his stitches checked, then with a sprained finger, later claiming a persistent headache that required treatment. Each visit seemed less medically necessary than the last, a fact not lost on Willa or her increasingly amused father. "That cowboy's either the most accident-prone man in Wyoming, or he's finding excuses to see you," Dr. Montgomery remarked one evening as they closed the clinic. "Don't be ridiculous, father," Willa replied, though she couldn't quite suppress the flutter in her stomach at the thought. "I'm old, Willa, not blind," he chuckled. "And that young man looks at you the way I used to look at your mother." Willa busied herself with organizing supplies, unwilling to acknowledge the observation. After Ethan's betrayal, the idea of another man's interest seemed like a cruel joke. Yet, she couldn't deny the way her pulse quickened whenever the clinic door opened, or her disappointment on days when Isaac didn't appear. A week later, Willa was delivering medicine to elderly Mrs. Hawkins on the edge of town when she spotted a familiar figure working with horses in the adjacent field. Isaac was breaking a spirited bay stallion, moving with a fluid grace that belied his size. Man and horse circled in a dance of wills, neither yielding but somehow reaching an understanding. Willa found herself pausing to watch, struck by the patient strength in his movements. When the horse finally accepted the saddle without bucking, Isaac patted its neck with genuine affection before glancing up and catching sight of her. The smile that spread across his face made her breath catch. "Miss Montgomery," he called, leading the horse toward her. "What brings you to this part of town?" "Deliveries for my father," she replied, holding up her basket as evidence. Isaac nodded, stopping a respectful distance away, mindful of the still nervous horse. "Would you allow me to escort you back to town when you're finished? These roads can be lonesome." Willa hesitated. Such an offer would surely fuel town gossip, which had only recently begun to subside. Seeing her hesitation, Isaac added, "Just as a courtesy from one neighbor to another." No impropriety intended. Something in his earnest expression made Willa nod before she could reconsider. "I'll be just a few minutes with Mrs. Hawkins." True to his word, Isaac waited, mounted on the freshly broken bay. When Willa emerged from the small cabin, he offered her his hand to help her mount behind him, his touch warm and steady. The ride back to town was unlike anything Willa had experienced. The powerful horse moved beneath them with surprising smoothness, while she was acutely aware of Isaac's solid presence before her. She had ridden double before, but never with someone who wasn't family. The proper thing would have been to hold the edge of the saddle, but when the horse jumped a small creek, she instinctively grasped Isaac's waist. "Sorry," she murmured, embarrassed. "No need," he replied, his voice carrying a smile. "I wouldn't want you falling off." As they approached town, Isaac slowed the horse. "Would it be better if I let you down here to avoid gossip?" Willa finished for him. The consideration in his offer touched her. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness, Mr. Blackwood, but I've had my fill of skulking about to please others. The town square will be fine." Isaac nodded, and they continued. Sure enough, their arrival drew curious stares from townspeople going about their afternoon business. Willa felt her cheeks warm but kept her head high as Isaac helped her down in front of her father's clinic. "Thank you for the escort," she said formally, aware of watching eyes. "The pleasure was mine, Miss Montgomery," he replied, tipping his hat. Before turning to leave, he added quietly, "You're stronger than they give you credit for." As Isaac rode away, Willa entered the clinic to find her father watching from the window, a knowing expression on his face. "Not a word, Father," she warned, though without real heat. Dr. Montgomery raised his hands in surrender, but his eyes twinkled. "I didn't say anything." That night, lying in her bed, Willa found herself replaying the day's events. The way Isaac's sun-bronzed hand had looked extended toward hers. The solid warmth of him as they rode together. The quiet confidence in his voice when he'd called her strong. But accompanying these pleasant thoughts came the sharp reminder of her folly with Ethan. She had been so certain of his love, so blindly trusting. How could she ever trust her judgment again? The memory of standing alone at the altar, the humiliation and heartbreak, was still too fresh, too raw. Willa turned on her side, determined to push Isaac Blackwood from her mind. Whatever his intentions, she wasn't ready. Perhaps she never would be. The following Sunday, Willa reluctantly attended church with her father, having avoided services since the wedding disaster. She sat rigid in the pew, ignoring the whispers and glances, focusing instead on Reverend Wallace's sermon about forgiveness and new beginnings. Words that should have been comforting but felt like salt in still open wounds. As they filed out after the service, Willa came face to face with Mrs. Foster, Ethan's mother. The older woman's eyes widened in surprise before her expression hardened. "Willa," she acknowledged stiffly. "Mrs. Foster," Willa replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Mrs. Foster glanced meaningfully at where Willa's ring finger remained bare. "I see you've not found another suitable match." Before Willa could formulate a response that wouldn't cause a scene on church steps, a warm presence appeared at her side. "Miss Montgomery," Isaac's voice came, respectful but firm. "I believe you promised to show me that book on local plant remedies this afternoon." Willa blinked in surprise. She'd made no such promise, but quickly grasped the lifeline he'd thrown her. "Yes, of course. If you'll excuse us, Mrs. Foster." Isaac offered his arm, which Willa gratefully took, allowing him to lead her away from the increasingly curious congregation. "Thank you," she murmured once they were out of earshot, "though I'm afraid I don't actually have a book to show you." Isaac's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Pity. I was genuinely interested in local remedies. Perhaps we could discuss them over lunch instead. I know it's forward of me to ask, but—" "Yes," Willa found herself saying, surprising them both with her quick acceptance. They walked to the small hotel restaurant, the only establishment open on Sundays. The matronly owner, Mrs. Jenkins, raised her eyebrows at the sight of them but seated them at a corner table without comment. Over simple fare of roast chicken and potatoes, their conversation flowed with unexpected ease. Isaac spoke of growing up on a small ranch in Colorado, losing his parents to influenza, and making his way as a cowhand across the territories. Willa shared stories of learning medicine from her father after her mother died, her dreams of perhaps becoming a proper doctor someday, though women weren't welcome in medical schools. "Why not apprentice with your father officially?" Isaac asked. "From what I've seen, you already have most of the skills." "Father has suggested it," Willa admitted, "but after what happened well, I was planning to move away, start fresh somewhere no one knew me." Isaac studied her thoughtfully. "And now," Willa pushed a potato around her plate. "Now I'm not sure what I want. Except not to be pitied," Isaac observed. She looked up, surprised by his perception. "Yes, exactly. I don't pity you, Willa," he said, the first time he'd used her given name. "I admire you." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. "You don't know me well enough to admire me." "I know enough," he replied simply. "I know you face this town every day with dignity despite their gossip. I know you have healing hands and a compassionate heart. I know you're smarter than most men I've met." Willa felt warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the food. "Mr. Blackwood, Isaac," he corrected gently. "Isaac," she conceded, "you should know that I'm not. I can't." She struggled to articulate the walls she'd built around her heart. "I'm not asking for anything, Willa," he said. "Just the pleasure of your company from time to time. Nothing more." The relief she felt was tinged with an unexpected disappointment, which confused her further. Their lunch concluded with Isaac insisting on paying and walking her home. At her door, he removed his hat and held it respectfully. "Thank you for a lovely afternoon," he said. "It was surprisingly pleasant," Willa admitted. "High praise indeed," Isaac smiled, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "Would it be too forward to call on you properly next Sunday?" Willa hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I would like that." As promised, Isaac called the following Sunday and the Sunday after that. Their outings were always proper walks through town, picnics by the creek within sight of other townspeople, visits to neighboring farms where Isaac had business and Willa could deliver medicines. Always in public, always respectable. Gradually, the town's whispers changed tone. The scandal of Willa's abandoned wedding began to fade as people grew accustomed to seeing her with the tall, respectful cowboy from the Triple R. Summer bloomed into its full glory, bringing with it an outbreak of fever that kept Willa and her father working day and night. Isaac appeared regularly at the clinic, bringing meals, fresh water, or simply an extra pair of hands when needed. One particularly grueling evening, after they'd finally stabilized young Tommy Wilson's fever, Willa stepped outside for a breath of air and found Isaac waiting on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You look exhausted," he said, offering her a steaming cup. 3 days with barely any sleep," she confirmed, gratefully accepting the coffee. "But Tommy's fever broke. He'll recover." They sat together on the porch steps, the night peaceful around them. Willa was too tired to maintain her usual guard and found herself leaning slightly against Isaac's solid shoulder. "You're remarkable," he said softly. "The way you fought for that boy's life. It's what anyone would do." "No," Isaac shook his head. "It's not. Most would have given up days ago, said it was God's will and left it at that. You never stopped fighting." Willa looked up at him, struck by the admiration in his gaze. That's how I am with everything, I suppose, too stubborn to know when to quit. Is that why you stayed in Sweetwater Springs? After what happened, he asked carefully. It was the first time he'd directly referenced her failed wedding, and surprisingly, the mention didn't bring the usual stab of pain. Partly, she admitted. I refused to be chased away from my home, my father, my work. But also. She hesitated, then decided honesty was due. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how I could have been so wrong about someone. Isaac was quiet for a moment. Have you found those answers? Willa stared into her coffee. I've come to realize there weren't signs I missed. Ethan simply became someone different than who he pretended to be. Or perhaps he was always that person, and I saw what I wanted to see. And what do you see now, Willa? Isaac asked, his voice low. When you look ahead, the question hung between them, weighted with meaning. Willa found herself standing at another crossroads, uncertain yet somehow less afraid than she'd been months ago. I see possibilities I didn't before, she answered honestly, but I'm still cautious. Isaac nodded, seeming to understand all she wasn't saying. Caution is wise, but so is hope. They sat in companionable silence until Dr. Montgomery called for Willa to help with another patient. As she rose to go, Isaac caught her hand gently. When this fever outbreak is past and you've had proper rest, would you accompany me to the Harvest Festival? As more than a friend. Willa felt her heart quicken. Are you courting me, Isaac Blackwood? I'm trying to, he replied with a smile that reached his eyes. Though I admit I'm not very practiced at it. Despite her exhaustion, Willa found herself smiling back. Yes, I'll go with you to the festival. The fever epidemic finally broke a week later, leaving the Montgomery clinic quieter, but its practitioners thoroughly drained. Willa slept for nearly a full day, waking to find a small package outside her window, a book on herbal medicine she'd mentioned wanting, with a simple note. For the healer with the strongest heart in Wyoming. Rest well. I.B. The gesture brought tears to her eyes, not for its grandness, but for its thoughtfulness. Isaac had listened, remembered, understood what would matter to her. By the time the Harvest Festival arrived in early September, Willa found herself filled with nervous anticipation. She chose her dress carefully, a blue calico that matched her eyes, with lace trim she'd added herself. As she pinned up her chestnut hair, she acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Isaac Blackwood. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it felt like waking from a long sleep. Different from the infatuation she'd felt for Ethan, less desperate, more grounded. Isaac had never pushed, never demanded, simply offered his steady presence and unwavering respect until her wounded heart had begun to heal. He arrived promptly at midday, freshly shaven and wearing a new shirt, his usually unruly dark hair tamed for the occasion. The way his eyes widened upon seeing her made Willa blush. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you, she replied. You're quite handsome yourself, Doctor. Montgomery observed their exchange with poorly concealed approval, before shooing them on their way with admonishments to enjoy themselves. The town square had been transformed with harvest decorations, corn husks, pumpkins, and ribbons adorning every available surface. Tables groaned with food brought by townsfolk, while a small band played lively tunes for dancing. As they walked together, Willa was acutely aware of Isaac's hand at the small of her back, guiding but never controlling. They were greeted warmly by some, with curious looks by others, but the open hostility that had once followed Willa had largely dissipated. They ate, talked, and even danced, Isaac proving surprisingly graceful despite his initial protests about his abilities. As evening approached, He suggested they walk to the edge of town where a small hill offered views of the festival lights below. Under a sky painted with sunset colors, they stood together, a respectable distance apart, yet somehow closer than they'd ever been. "I have something to ask you," Isaac said, his usual confidence tempered with nervous energy. Willa's heart began to race. "Yes. I've been offered a position as foreman at the RRR," he explained. "It would mean staying in Sweetwater Springs permanently, building a life here." "That's wonderful news," Willa said sincerely. "You've earned it." Isaac turned to face her fully. "Before I accept, I need to know if there might be a future for us, Willa, because if there isn't, I don't think I could bear to stay and see you every day knowing." He trailed off, vulnerability plain in his expression. Willa took a deep breath. "When Ethan left me at the altar, I thought I'd never trust again. I was certain my heart was too damaged to risk on anyone else." Isaac's face fell slightly, but he nodded with resignation. "I understand." "No," Willa said quickly, reaching for his hand. "What I'm trying to say is that you've shown me I was wrong. You've been patient and kind, never pushing but never retreating. And somewhere along the way, without meaning to, I found myself falling in love with you." The hope that blazed in Isaac's eyes made her breath catch. "Willa Montgomery, are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying yes, there's a future for us," she confirmed, her voice stronger now. "If that's what you want." Isaac's answer was to close the distance between them, one hand gently cradling her face as his lips met hers in a kiss that spoke of promise and tenderness. Willa leaned into him, feeling for the first time that the broken pieces of her heart had not just mended but reformed into something stronger. When they finally broke apart, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Willa. I think I have since the moment you stitched my arm and didn't suffer my foolishness," she laughed softly. "Is that why you kept finding excuses to visit the clinic?" "Guilty," he admitted with a grin, though the sprained finger was real enough. "I knew it," she teased, feeling lighter than she had in months. They returned to the festival hand in hand, their changed relationship evident to all who saw them. There were smiles, a few surprised looks, and even a grudging nod of approval from Mrs. Foster, whose husband's bank had nearly failed after Ethan's theft was discovered. In the weeks that followed, their courtship progressed with a steady certainty. Isaac formally asked Dr. Montgomery's permission to court Willa, though her father merely chuckled and said he'd been waiting for the request. Isaac took his new position as foreman, working long hours but always finding time to see Willa. They began planning a future together, modest dreams of a small house on the edge of town, close enough for Willa to continue her medical work with her father, but with space for Isaac's horses. As winter approached, bringing with it the first snowfall, Isaac invited Willa for a ride to see a property he was considering purchasing. They rode together on his bay stallion, now fully trained and responsive to his slightest command. The land was beautiful, 10 acres with a clear creek running through it, a small cabin that needed work but had good bones, and views of the mountains in the distance. "What do you think?" Isaac asked as they stood on what could be a front porch someday. "It's perfect," Willa said honestly. "Close enough to town but private." Isaac nodded, seeming pleased by her approval. "I thought we might build a proper house eventually, but the cabin could be made comfortable for now, with some work." "For us?" Willa asked carefully. Isaac turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Willa Montgomery, I'm not an eloquent man, and I don't have wealth or position to offer you. What I have is my heart, my hands, and my word that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "This was my mother's. I've carried it since she died, waiting for the day I might find someone who embodied her strength and kindness. Dropping to one knee in the fresh snow, he looked up at her with love shining in his eyes. I'm asking you to be my wife. To build a life with me, here or wherever you want to go. I promise to stand beside you, support your dreams, and love you faithfully until my dying day. Tears welled in Willa's eyes, but unlike the last time she'd been proposed to, these were tears of joy. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Isaac, I will marry you. His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as though it had been made for her. When he stood and wrapped her in his arms, Willa felt a certainty she'd never known before this was right. This was where she belonged. They decided on a spring wedding, wanting time to prepare the cabin and for the snow to clear so Isaac's friends from neighboring ranches could attend. Willa was determined this wedding would be different, smaller, more intimate, focused on their commitment rather than appearances. As they rode back to town, snow began falling again, dusting Isaac's dark hair and Willa's cloak with delicate crystals. Willa found herself laughing with pure happiness as Isaac urged the horse faster through the gathering dusk. We should tell your father first, Isaac said as they approached town. He's been more than kind to me. Willa agreed, though she suspected her father already knew Isaac's intentions. Dr. Montgomery had developed a fondness for the young cowboy that went beyond mere approval. Sure enough, when they arrived at the Montgomery home with their news, Dr. Montgomery embraced them both, his eyes suspiciously moist. Your mother would have loved him, he told Willa privately later. He has her same steadfastness. The town's reaction to their engagement was largely positive, though a few still whispered about Willa's previous misfortune. But this time, the whispers didn't touch her. She was too secure in Isaac's love, too certain of their future together to be shaken by gossip. Winter passed in a flurry of preparations. Willa continued working alongside her father while beginning to gather items for her trousseau. Isaac spent every spare moment repairing the cabin, often returning to town with sawdust in his hair and exhaustion in his body, but satisfaction in his eyes as he reported on his progress. They decided their wedding would take place in mid-April, when the wildflowers would be blooming across the plains. Reverend Wallace would perform the ceremony in the small church Willa had insisted, wanting to replace the painful memories of standing alone at the altar with new ones of Isaac waiting for her. As the date approached, an unexpected letter arrived for Willa. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the return address made her blood run cold. It was from Ethan Foster, postmarked from Denver. Willa stared at the unopened letter for hours, unsure whether to read it or burn it unread. Finally, deciding that ghosts were best confronted directly, she broke the seal. The letter was short, an apology of sorts, though couched in excuses about pressure from his father and opportunities that couldn't be missed. Ethan explained he was married now to a banker's daughter in Denver, with a position at her father's firm. He expressed hope that Willa had found contentment and asked, with breathtaking audacity, for her forgiveness. Willa read it twice before carefully folding it and placing it back in the envelope. She had expected to feel anger, pain, or at least bitterness. Instead, she felt only a gentle release, as though the last tether binding her to the past had finally broken. When Isaac called that evening, she showed him the letter without comment. He read it silently, his expression darkening briefly before he looked up at her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his concern evident. "Yes," Willa answered truthfully. "Better than all right." I realized reading his words that I've already forgiven him, not for his sake but for mine, and I'm grateful. Isaac's brow furrowed. "Grateful? For what he did to you," Willa smiled, taking his hand. grateful that he didn't come that day. If he had, I would never have known what real love feels like. I would never have found you. The wonder in Isaac's eyes as he processed her words made her heart swell. He gathered her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Then I'm grateful too, though I still think he was the biggest fool in Wyoming Territory. His loss, Willa murmured against Isaac's chest. My gain. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck the Triple R Ranch. A late spring blizzard swept through the territory, catching a herd being moved to spring pastures. Isaac and the other cowboys worked tirelessly to save the cattle, spending 3 days and nights in brutal conditions. When Isaac finally returned to town, he was suffering from exposure and exhaustion. Dr. Montgomery diagnosed the early stages of pneumonia and ordered complete bed rest, something the stubborn cowboy fought, until Willa threatened to postpone the wedding if he didn't comply. "You're not marrying me in a pine box," she told him firmly, spooning broth between his chapped lips. "So you'll stay in that bed until Father says otherwise." Isaac recovered, though more slowly than he would have liked. The wedding had to be delayed by a week, but by the end of April, he was well enough to stand without support and breathe without coughing. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect. Wildflowers carpeted the plains around Sweetwater Springs, and the air carried the promise of summer. In her room, Willa prepared with trembling hands, not from fear but from anticipation. Her dress was simpler than her first wedding gown, ivory satin with delicate embroidery she'd done herself, incorporating small blue forget-me-nots around the neckline. Her mother's pearl earrings completed the ensemble, along with a crown of fresh flowers for her hair. "You look radiant," her father said when he came to escort her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I feel it," Willa replied, kissing his cheek. "This time is different, Father. This time is right." "I know," he nodded, offering his arm. "Isaac is the son I never had, and he loves you the way you deserve to be loved." The small church was filled with well-wishers, Isaac's fellow cowboys from the Triple R, patients Willa had helped through the years, and even a few who had once gossiped about her standing now to celebrate her happiness. But Willa saw none of them as she walked down the aisle. Her eyes were fixed on Isaac, standing tall and handsome at the altar in a new black suit, his usually untamed hair combed neatly, his face shining with love and pride as he watched her approach. This time, there was no doubt, no waiting, no empty place where a groom should stand. Isaac reached for her hand as soon as she was close enough, as though he couldn't bear another moment without touching her. "You're more beautiful than I deserve," he whispered as her father placed her hand in his. "We deserve each other," she corrected softly. The ceremony passed in a blur of emotion. They had written their own vows, simple promises exchanged with voices that trembled with sincerity. When Reverend Wallace pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was reverent yet possessive, sealing their bond before God and their community. The celebration afterward was joyous, a feast provided by the townspeople, music from local fiddlers, dancing that continued well into the evening. As twilight fell, Isaac led Willa away from the festivities toward where his horse waited, saddled and ready. "Are we leaving already?" she asked, surprised. Isaac smiled, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. "I have a surprise for you." They rode in the gathering darkness toward their property, Willa nestled securely against her husband's chest. When they crested the final hill, she gasped. The cabin glowed with warm light from dozens of lanterns hung from trees and porch posts. Flowers adorned the newly repaired door, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. "When did you do all this?" Willa asked in wonder as Isaac helped her down. "I had help," he admitted. "The boys from the ranch finished the repairs while I was sick, and Mrs. Jenkins from the hotel arranged the decorations today. Lifting her into his arms, Isaac carried her across the threshold of their new home. Inside, Willa found the cabin transformed from the rough shelter she'd seen months ago into a cozy home. Simple furniture crafted from local wood, curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed in the corner, and a fire crackling in the hearth. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," Isaac said, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning in his embrace to face him. "Everything is perfect." Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilt, the fire burning low in the hearth, Willa traced the strong lines of her husband's face with gentle fingers. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'm thinking about that day in the clinic when you first came in with your injured arm," she replied. "How fate works in mysterious ways." Isaac smiled, pulling her closer. "I believe some things are meant to be, Willa. Some hearts are destined to find each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way." "Even being left at the altar," she asked, the memory now distant and powerless. "Even that," he confirmed. "Especially that, because it led you to me." "And you to me," she whispered, resting her head on his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. Outside, the Wyoming night wrapped around their cabin like a protective blanket. Stars scattered across the vast sky, witnesses to the beginning of their life together. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Willa and Isaac found the peace and belonging they had both been seeking. Spring blossomed into a glorious summer, and their life together settled into a rhythm that felt both new and as familiar as breathing. Isaac's work at the RRR kept him busy during daylight hours, while Willa continued her medical practice alongside her father, who spoke increasingly of retirement and passing the clinic to her care. They expanded the cabin, adding a proper kitchen and a small room where Willa could see patients when traveling to town was difficult. Isaac built shelves for her growing collection of medical books and planted a garden of medicinal herbs outside their bedroom window. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, talking about their days or sometimes just existing together in companionable silence. On weekends, they often rode across their property, Isaac teaching Willa about the land and its possibilities, Willa showing him which plants could heal and which to avoid. Their happiness was not without challenges. The life of a ranch foreman meant Isaac sometimes worked from dawn until well past dusk during busy seasons. Willa's medical duties occasionally called her away in the middle of the night for emergencies or difficult births. They weathered their first argument about Isaac taking unnecessary risks during a lightning storm to save a stranded calf with heated words, followed by sincere apologies and a deeper understanding of each other's fears and priorities. As their first anniversary approached, Willa began to suspect a new chapter in their lives was beginning. Her suspicions were confirmed by her father after she experienced several mornings of nausea followed by inexplicable fatigue. "When will you tell Isaac, Doctor?" Montgomery asked after examining his daughter with a broad smile. "Tonight," Willa decided, her hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "It's the perfect anniversary gift, don't you think?" That evening, she prepared Isaac's favorite meal, venison stew with dumplings and apple pie for dessert. She set their small table with care, using the good dishes they'd received as wedding gifts but rarely used. Isaac arrived home tired but brightened at the sight of the special preparations. "What's the occasion? I didn't forget our anniversary, did I? I thought that was next week." "It is," Willa confirmed, kissing him in welcome. "This is just because I love you." Over dinner, they talked about their day, Isaac describing a new breeding program he wanted to implement at the ranch, Willa sharing news from town. As she served the pie, Willa found herself suddenly nervous about her announcement. "Isaac," she began, setting down her fork. "I have something to tell you." He looked up, concern instantly crossing his features. "Is everything all right?" She reached across the table for his hand. "Everything is wonderful, better than wonderful." Taking a deep breath, she continued, "We're going to have a baby in early spring." Isaac's expression transformed from concern to shock to pure joy in the span of heartbeats. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed with wonder. "We're having a baby." Willa nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears as Isaac rose from his chair and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "When did you know? How are you feeling? Is everything progressing as it should?" The questions tumbled out of him as he gently set her down, his hands moving to cradle her face. Willa laughed through her tears. "Yes, everything is fine. Father confirmed it today, though I've suspected for a few weeks. The baby should arrive in March or early April." Isaac dropped to his knees before her, pressing his ear to her stomach as though he might hear something, though it was far too early. The tenderness of the gesture made Willa's heart swell with love. "Hello in there," he whispered against the fabric of her dress. "I'm your father, and I already love you more than I can say." Looking up at Willa with eyes shining with emotion, he added, "Thank you for making me the happiest man in Wyoming Territory, for our family." The months of Willa's pregnancy passed with Isaac growing increasingly protective, much to her amused exasperation. He insisted on hiring a young woman from town to help with household chores and limited Willa's medical work to consultations rather than physically demanding tasks, despite her protests that women had been having babies while working for all of human history. "Not my wife," he would say firmly. "Not with my child." Yet for all his protectiveness, Isaac never tried to control her or diminish her independence. He supported her continued education, ordering medical journals from as far away as Chicago and discussing cases with her in the evenings. When she expressed interest in specializing in women's and children's health, he encouraged her to write to female doctors in eastern cities for guidance. Winter came early that year, blanketing their land in snow by November. Isaac added extra insulation to the cabin walls and stockpiled firewood, until Willa teased they could survive being snowed in until midsummer. As Christmas approached, they received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Montgomery arrived one snowy afternoon with a large wagon containing furniture Willa instantly recognized from her childhood home. "Father, what's all this?" she asked as Isaac helped unload a beautiful wooden cradle. "I'm selling the house in town," her father announced. "Taking rooms above the clinic instead. These things should be here, where your child, my grandchild, will grow up." "But the house has been your home for 30 years, Willa protested. Dr. Montgomery smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "It was a home because our family was in it. Now my family is here." He patted her growing belly. "And I intend to be close enough to spoil this little one properly." That night, after her father had returned to town with promises to visit again soon, Willa sat in the rocking chair he'd brought, the same chair her mother had used to rock her as an infant. Isaac knelt beside her, his hand resting on the swell of their child. "Your father is a good man," he said softly. "I hope I can be half the father to our child that he has been to you." "You will be," Willa assured him, running her fingers through his dark hair. "You already are, caring for us both so tenderly." As her pregnancy progressed, Willa found herself contemplating how different her life might have been had Ethan Foster appeared at the church that day nearly 2 years ago. She would have been a banker's wife in a loveless marriage, possibly now in Denver with a husband who valued money over honor. Instead, she was building a life of purpose and love, pursuing her calling while creating a family with a man who cherished her strength rather than seeking to diminish it. On a crisp March morning, as the first wildflowers began to appear across the plains, Willa went into labor. Isaac sent one of the ranch hands racing for Dr. Montgomery while he boiled water and prepared the bedroom as Willa had instructed him weeks before. "Remember," she told him between contractions, her face flushed but determined, "this is natural. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "None of them were my wife," Isaac replied, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes as he wiped her brow with a cool cloth. Dr. Montgomery arrived within the hour, bringing his medical bag and calm experience. The labor progressed normally but slowly, testing Willa's endurance and Isaac's composure. As the sun began to set, Willa's pains intensified. "You're doing beautifully," her father encouraged. "Not much longer now." Isaac never left her side, supporting her through each contraction, whispering words of love and strength when her courage faltered. As midnight approached, Willa gathered her remaining energy for the final pushes. With a cry that seemed to echo across the plains, their daughter entered the world in the early hours of a new day. Dr. Montgomery cleaned the tiny, wailing infant before placing her in Willa's arms. "She's perfect," Willa whispered, counting fingers and toes through tears of exhaustion and joy. Isaac stared at their daughter in wonderment, his usual eloquence abandoned. When he finally found his voice, it was rough with emotion. "She looks like you, beautiful like her mother." "What shall we name her?" Willa asked, though they had discussed possibilities for months. Isaac gently touched the downy dark hair on their daughter's head. "Margaret, after your mother. We could call her Maggie." "Margaret Isabella Blackwood," Willa decided, incorporating the feminine form of Isaac's name. "Maggie for everyday. Doctor." Montgomery, watching from the foot of the bed, nodded his approval. "A fine name for a fine girl. Your mother would be honored." After ensuring both mother and child were stable, Dr. Montgomery retired to the small guest room, leaving the new family to bond. Isaac stretched out beside Willa on the bed, one arm protectively around them both as little Maggie nursed for the first time. "I never knew it was possible to love someone I just met so completely," Isaac murmured, watching their daughter with awe. "That's the miracle of it," Willa replied softly. "How our hearts expand to make room for more love than we ever thought possible." As spring bloomed across their land, bringing new life after the long winter, Willa and Isaac adjusted to parenthood with the same determination and partnership that characterized everything they did together. Maggie proved to be a good-natured baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined expression. Word of Dr. Montgomery's first grandchild spread through Sweetwater Springs, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts and good wishes. Even Mrs. Foster came, bringing a handmade blanket and tentative congratulations that Willa accepted with gracious thanks, the past now truly behind her. By summer, Willa had resumed seeing patients, though on a limited schedule that allowed her to care for Maggie. Isaac built an addition to the cabin, a proper examination room with its own entrance so patients wouldn't disturb the household. Dr. Montgomery visited weekly, both to see patients alongside his daughter and to bounce his granddaughter on his knee, singing the same lullabies he had once sung to Willa. On warm evenings, the young family would sit on their porch, Maggie sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms while Isaac described his plans for their future, a larger house as their family grew, more land for cattle of their own rather than just managing the Triple R herds, perhaps even a small school nearby someday, so their children wouldn't have to travel far for education. Willa would listen, adding her own dreams expanded medical services for the growing community, a proper garden of medicinal plants, perhaps even apprenticing young women interested in healing arts. Their visions intertwined like their lives, separate yet perfectly complementary. As Maggie's first birthday approached, Willa found herself once again with news to share. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Maggie toddling between them on increasingly steady legs, she took Isaac's hand. "It seems Maggie will be a big sister before her second birthday," she said, a smile playing at her lips. Isaac's face lit with joy as he gathered both his wife and daughter into his arms. "Really? You're certain?" "As certain as a doctor can be about these things," Willa confirmed. "Father agrees. Late summer, we think." Isaac pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes shining with happiness. "Our family grows just as our love does." 5 years later, the small cabin had evolved into a proper ranch house, with room for their growing family Maggie, now a curious and spirited 5-year-old. William, a sturdy 3-year-old boy with his father's build and his mother's healing touch, and infant twins Elizabeth and Emma, who had surprised everyone with their arrival just 6 months earlier. Isaac had become part owner of the Triple R after the original owner decided to retire east, while Willa's medical practice had expanded to include a small hospital wing, where women from surrounding areas came for difficult births or specialized care. On the anniversary of their wedding, now 7 years past, they still made time to ride together to the hill where Isaac had proposed, leaving the children in the capable hands of Dr. Montgomery, now fully retired, and delighting in his role as grandfather. They packed a picnic and spent the afternoon reminiscing about their journey and planning their future. As they sat beneath the same oak tree where Isaac had once knelt in the snow, Willa leaned against his shoulder, content in the life they had built together. "You ever think about that day?" she asked quietly. "When I was supposed to marry Ethan?" Isaac considered the question before answering. "Sometimes. Not with anger anymore, but with a strange sort of gratitude." "I feel the same," Willa admitted. "If he had come that day, I would never have known what true partnership feels like. Our children would never have been born. My life would have been so much smaller." Isaac turned to face her, taking both her hands in his as he had countless times over the years. "Do you remember what I asked you that day I found you still waiting at the altar? After everyone else had gone?" Willa nodded, the memory clear despite the years that had passed. "You said, 'Can I be the one you waited for?' And you told me to go away," Isaac chuckled. "I was not at my most gracious," Willa acknowledged with a smile, "but you came back anyway." "I would have kept coming back," Isaac said, his voice low and sincere, "for as long as it took. Some things are worth waiting for." Willa leaned forward, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that held 7 years of shared joys and sorrows, challenges overcome and dreams fulfilled. When they broke apart, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become the rhythm of her life. "I'm glad I waited," she whispered, "even when I didn't know what or who I was waiting for." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they gathered their picnic and mounted Isaac's faithful bay horse, now aging but still strong enough to carry them both. Willa settled against her husband's chest, feeling the security of his arms around her as they rode toward home, toward the lights of their ranch house where their children waited. Toward the future they continued to build together, one day at a time. In the distance, the church spire of Sweetwater Springs caught the last rays of sunlight, a reminder of where their journey together had begun, with a woman left waiting, and a cowboy brave enough to ask if he could be the one she had waited for. The answer, Willa now knew with absolute certainty, had always been yes.